We're speaking with Ted Cruz, who is running for the Senate, the U.S. Senate in Texas, the Kay Bailey Hutchison's seat, which is going to become vacant. She's retiring. And we initially thought that there was going to be quite a battle in the primary on this seat, but it looks like the field is clearing for you here.
Well, there have been really two phases to the primary. The first phase played out in the first 6 months of the year, and it was a battle to determine who would be the strong conservative candidate. And it was incredibly encouraging. We have seen conservatives both in Texas and nationally unite behind our campaign. The second phase is my principal opponent now is the Lieutenant Governor in Texas, David Dewhurst. And he is an establishment incumbent. He is not a conservative. His record's not been conservative. But he has very high name ID and he's independently wealthy. So he will spend $10 to $20 million of his own money flooding the airwaves with paid media. And so what we have in Texas now is actually very similar to the primary battles we saw all over the country in 2010. Between a strong, principled conservative candidate with the support of the Tea Party, with a record of fighting for free market principles in the Constitution, versus an incumbent establishment moderate. And I'm certainly hopeful that we will continue the pattern of 2010 with a strong conservative winning the race.
And of course, Texas is getting a lot more attention than maybe it did a couple of months ago because Rick Perry has jumped into the race. Has that changed the Senate race in Texas at all?
You know, it has certainly had some impact on it. And I think a great many of the supporters of Rick Perry have been enthusiastically supporting me in the Senate race. And I think what both the presidential race and the Senate race are focusing on is which candidate is the best candidate to lead the fight, to stop the Obama agenda, to defend free market principles, and to defend the Constitution. I think that's the fight we're seeing play out in the presidential primary, and it's exactly the fight that is at issue in the Texas Senate primary. And in my opinion, the Texas Senate primary will come down to two questions. Will the next senator from Texas be a strong conservative? And will the next senator from Texas be a fighter? And I am running based on a proven conservative record of having stood up and fought for conservative principles over and over again for over a decade and having won on a national level repeatedly.
You had a great speech yesterday. You're on the cover of National Review magazine. You're on a roll.
It has been, the momentum we have seen has been nothing short of incredible. But you know, it's going to take that. Because my opponent has the resources to just flood the airwaves with paid television ads, our strategy is simple. We are building a conservative grassroots army all across Texas and all across the country. And the way we are going to stand up and win this race is continuing to unite conservative activists, Tea Party leaders, Republican women, all those who want to stand and defend free market principles in the Constitution. And if we continue to do that, if we continue to build on the momentum, I'm confident we're going to win. And I'll tell you something, Ed, and it's a promise I'll make to all your listeners, which is that if I just go to the Senate and vote right 100% of the time, I will consider myself an abject failure. Because Barack Obama is incredibly effective defending government control of the economy and our lives. And what we desperately need is strong leadership. If I am not standing in front helping lead the fight, if I don't have arrows up and down my torso, I won't be doing my job. That's why I'm running for Senate, and that's why we're seeing conservatives unite behind this campaign.
You told a very engaging personal story yesterday about your family and about their origins, and obviously you were not born with a silver spoon in your mouth. I think it was very well received, and I think a lot of people yesterday were drawing the parallels between yourself and Marco Rubio, who's got a very similar life story.
Marco Rubio and I share a very similar story, and a lot of people have been comparing this Texas Senate race to the Florida Senate race in 2010 between Charlie Crist and Rubio. Like Rubio, my family fled Cuba. My dad is from Cuba. He was born in Cuba, grew up there, and as a teenager he was thrown in prison and tortured. And he came to Texas when he was 18 years old. He didn't speak English. He had no possessions, but he had $100 sewn into his underwear. And he got a job as a dishwasher, making 50 cents an hour. And he worked 7 days a week. He paid his way through the University of Texas. And he ended up starting a small business and working towards the American dream. And Ed, you know, you and I have talked before about how when I was a kid, my dad used to say to me over and over again, When we faced oppression in Cuba, I had a place to flee to. If we lose our freedom here, where do we go? And there's no question that better explains why it is I'm running for Senate than that question right there.
Who are you looking to in terms of your maybe philosophical and your political ideals? I mean, what figures would you be looking at in terms of saying, you know, if you're looking at Ted Cruz, you'd be looking at another who?
I've had two heroes in life, my dad and Ronald Reagan. You know, one of the interesting things about the new generation of leaders that is coming up is that a number of us, Marco Rubio and Mike Lee and I, we're all within 6 months of the same age. All of us, I was 10 when Ronald Reagan was elected. And much like the World War II generation, where for them FDR was their president for the rest of their lives, for our generation, I will go to my grave with Ronald Wilson Reagan defining what it means to be President of the United States, to have firm, principled, conservative views, to have a backbone, and to stand up and defend freedom and to defend our legacy as a shining city on a hill. Now, in terms of what's going on in the Senate, I think what we are seeing nationally is a battle for the heart and soul of the Senate. 3 years ago, Senator Jim DeMint was a lonely man in the U.S. Senate. He's the strongest conservative in the Senate. He was fighting for Republicans to defend conservative principles, to stop growing the size, power, and spending of the federal government, and he had virtually no allies. In 2010, he went around the country looking for strong conservatives running for Senate in primaries, and he backed them. He backed Marco Rubio in Florida, and Mike Lee in Utah, and Rand Paul in Kentucky, and Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania. And every one of them beat establishment moderate candidates that the party graybeards had picked. I'll tell you one thing I am incredibly humbled and encouraged by. I am the only Senate candidate in the country who's been endorsed by Senator Jim DeMint and Senator Mike Lee and Senator Rand Paul and Senator Pat Toomey. Their presence has changed the Senate. We now have a core of strong principled conservatives, but they're critically outnumbered. And what this Texas Senate primary is about is, does the number of strong principled conservatives grow? If we can grow it from 5 or 6 to 10 or 12, it will change the character of the U.S. Senate. And the reason the 4 of them have endorsed me and encouraged conservatives nationally to support my campaign, to contribute to my campaign, is because they need reinforcements. If we're going to stop the Obama agenda, if we're going to shrink the Leviathan and turn around this path of debt and deficit and destruction that our nation is on, we've got to have strong, principled, conservative leadership, and that's what I'm committed to do.
Ted, speaking of what's going on in the Senate recently, this past week, Harry Reid changed the Senate rules. Very arcane, but a fairly significant change to the rules. You almost have to kind of be immersed in parliamentary procedure to understand what this was about.
Right.
But what does that say to you about first off, what the Democrats are trying to do in the Senate, and secondly, what the Republicans need to do in this next upcoming election?
Well, Harry Reid exercised the nuclear option, as it was called, and essentially what it does is allows the majority to dictate the agenda in the Senate and doesn't allow the minority to stop what's going on. And what's interesting is the context in which he did it. He didn't want to vote on the president's stimulus plan. And the reason he didn't want to vote is because it would lose. And the problem Harry Reid has, the problem Barack Obama has, is their agenda is radical. Barack Obama is the most radical president this country has ever seen, and their agenda is not working. Their so-called jobs plan doesn't produce jobs other than for union bosses and political friends of the Democrats and the Obama administration. It doesn't produce jobs. There are 25 million people who are out of work in this country. That is a tragedy, and it is holding back our economy. The same week President Obama launched his so-called job speech, I put out a 12-point jobs and growth plan that Senator Jim DeMint blasted out to tens of thousands of conservatives nationwide. And he encouraged people to read our 12-point jobs and growth plan. He said this plan should be a model for conservative candidates all across the country. And the difference is, President Obama and Harry Reid, they think government creates jobs. Government doesn't create jobs. Only the private sector, entrepreneurs putting capital to work, that's what creates jobs. But what government can do is kill jobs. And in the last 2.5 years, the Obama administration has waged an unrelenting war on jobs. We need to stop that war on jobs and unleash the private sector, and that's how we're going to turn our economy around.
This week, there's, well, the last 3 weeks, there's been a number of people protesting at Wall Street, and these protests are kind of spreading around the country now. They're not necessarily numerous, but there's numerous number of these events now going on. Occupy Wall Street is really the core of that.
Right.
What do you think about Occupy Wall Street? What does it mean? And do you think that it's equal to the Tea Party?
Of course not on the second point.
Right.
I mean, look, the Tea Party has been an incredible organic movement of millions of Americans across the country standing up for free market principles in the Constitution. I think the Tea Party is the most exciting thing we have seen in politics in a generation. The Occupy Wall Street movement, I guess as it's being called, it depends. It may be too early to see exactly what they're looking for. I've seen some media reports that what they're fighting for is to re-elect Barack Obama. If that's what they're fighting for, then it's an agenda that will hurt the American economy. It's an agenda that doesn't make any sense. But you know, Ed, one of the great lies of politics is the lie that Republicans are the party of big business. The truth of the matter is big business and the Wall Street banks do just great with big government. They hop in bed with big government. They hire lobbyists and lawyers and they descend on government. Republicans are and should be the party of entrepreneurs and small businesses. Those that are engaging in what Schumpeter called creative destruction, which is the next new, better mousetrap that takes on the big business and grows to become the next big business. Just this week, we mourn the loss of Steve Jobs, an incredible entrepreneur. And you want to think about the legacy that that entrepreneur left this country in terms of fabulous products. I love my iPhone, but a legacy in terms of innovation, produced jobs. It is those entrepreneurs that drive our economy, and it's precisely those entrepreneurs that are the target of the Obama war on jobs. Big government, big business, and Wall Street all get in bed together. I think we need to get government out of the business of bailouts, out of the business of picking winners and losers, and unleash the private sector to let competition produce jobs.
Speaking of getting government out of the position of picking winners and losers, what's your views on what to do with the tax code, both corporate tax code and personal tax code?
Part of my 12-point jobs and growth plan, the first 6 are defensive. They are stopping the Obama war on jobs. Repealing Obamacare, repealing Dodd-Frank, stopping abusive enforcement of the environmental laws, stopping the onslaught on right to work